Jennifer Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, this recently came about in an agreed statement of facts with Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond and the Law Society of BC that the DNA test that she took found she had substantial Indigenous DNA. Should that have pretty much been the end of this?
I think that's a really interesting question to ask, because there's been a lot of conversation about where she belongs. And when we talk about Indigenous identity, we're not just talking about the DNA that is in your blood, because blood quantum is traditionally a colonial concept to address somebody's Indigenous identity, but your sense of belonging. And, you know, I think that there's been a lot of questions around her because of how publicly known she is. And I think that if you're going to reach that point where, you know, your identity is help boosting you or put you on those national scales, so you're so well known and you're advancing your career to the point it is, there is going to be a lot of questions, more so about the belonging over your blood quantum.
Negon, Turpel-Lafond's husband's nation also claims her, but you recently wrote a column on this and wrote, while some may see Turpel-Lafond as Indigenous, many others, like yourself, do not.
You know, sovereignty is an important concept here, because yes, Muskeg Lake, her husband's community, may claim her and may evoke whatever notions of kinship that they wish, whether that includes DNA or not. But the fact is that not all of us have to agree on that, have to agree particularly on what their concept of membership includes. And that's also a part of sovereignty, by Indigenous nations evoking different understandings about what membership includes. And in the case of Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, she certainly has shown that she is willing to, at times, make up or certainly exaggerate elements of her community, where she grew up, and then particularly communities like Norway House Cree Nation in Manitoba, claiming very deep ties with that place, in which that community has not either heard of her or is not claiming her. And if Indigenous identity is not about who you claim, but who claims you, she certainly doesn't fulfill the criteria. And so under that criteria, I would say that under my understanding of indigeneity, particularly around kinship, the things that Jennifer's talking about, Indigenous identity as not being fulfilled in this particular case. And I think what I wrote about in my column is that therefore, for the rest of us who are impacted by someone like this, for instance, being on a hiring committee or making influential choices for the rest of us, I think we have a right to ask those questions and also make determinations on her identity.
Jennifer, you know, as Negon says, this is different for every nation, but how, I guess, can nations address membership when these questions arise?
We can go back to prior to the Indian Act and bring back membership codes, especially now from the amendments to the Indian Act that we have the ability to do that. But there are a lot of questions that have to be answered on how we approach that now, because it's difficult to go back to our traditional ways of knowing and our traditional ways of governing our nations when there has been government influenced policy that has affected the way that happens. And what I mean by that is when you have the residential school system and then the child welfare system and 60 Scoop, that is going to inevitably have lasting impacts. So now, not only can we bring back membership codes and how we govern our members on our nations, but we need to be talking about what that looks like for our lost relatives that are disconnected now to community, and how we make a conscious effort to bring them back. Because there are going to be, you know, First Nations people across the country that are products of the child welfare system that have never lived on community, but do deserve to belong to their community and be claimed by their community and have that connection back to their culture, you know, through language and ceremony. But how do we properly balance both? And we're going to have these tough conversations, and, you know, we're going to be leveraging it with people that, you know, call themselves pretendian hunters, but may at the end of the day be doing more harm than good and undermining another nation's sovereignty while they try to navigate that. So I think that's a really important part that we need to be remembering, is that, you know, just because somebody looks a certain way or talks a certain way or grew up in a certain place does not negate the fact that they have every right to belong to their community. And the more we talk about addictions and mental health and, you know, the root cause of crime, we need to be allowing people to connect to community, because that plays a huge role in the rehabilitation of their life.
And Negon, do you anticipate we'll see more of these high-profile cases, though?
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to identify that the very specific nuance that Jennifer's speaking about, which is that term pretendian, which Drew Lafond has pointed out in elsewhere that is a very problematic term. It often labels and confuses the issue of sovereignty and the ways in which different communities recognize their members differently. There's nothing wrong with that. That's part of what Indigenous nationhood evokes and involves. It's just that the rest of us have to negotiate and figure that out, including Canadians. The problem is Canadians are generally not able, quite unprepared on dealing with this issue around the nuance of Indigenous identity. And unfortunately, it is Canadian institutions that are often involving Indigenous peoples on very high profile, high paying, very influential positions that then impact the rest of us. And so we really have to be able to educate Canadians on these specific nuances that involve membership in different communities and have them understand that not all communities are the same. And certainly blood quantum will never fulfill the criteria within universities. And that's why universities is an example, or just jobs or any other institutions. And so therefore, they really have to work with local indigenous nations to be able to help rebuild those governments and then evoke those membership codes, as Jennifer talked about.
Jennifer and Egon, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks to you both.
Thank you.